Why are blacks poorer than whites on the whole? Why do they have less political power? Why do they have fewer job opportunities?
Boy, that's not an easy question. And any way I say it will be inadequate. The coming of political rights and economic opportunities that flow from political rights arrived at a point when the American economy was changing.
Blacks were getting free as the economy was really changing, becoming global.
And so we have a huge labor force of unskilled and skilled laborers for whom there are not just no jobs. You see, that is one layer of analysis which you can stop, but it somehow does not make the story human. But when you talk about a man who's willing to work, but who cannot work, not simply because of prejudice, yes, that is a factor, but far more important is the fact that the job does no longer exist. You see, my father had his high school education and built every house we lived in and so forth and so on because the economy, even under segregation, the national economy was different. And so in a way, my father was economically freer, although he couldn't vote. But he sent me to college. I can vote. I can't send any kid to college. And I certainly can't buy a house as my father did. I mean, I just make enough to just keep going. And I have all the things that he thought he was giving me to prevent just the sort of bind that I'm in. And it says nothing about prejudice and racism, and I don't mean to say that those things don't exist. It's just more complicated, and I think if we allow that complication, then we truly appreciate and understand the plight of blacks, black poor, and all poor.
You said that minorities could indeed change the direction of American politics for the better by breaking their alliance with the government.
Yes.
In what sense?
In the sense that the government would first of all be seen not as a savior. Inherently, it is not a savior. That the American federal government acted as a liberator was no great favor, for Christ's sake. This is what it should have done. It was doing what it should have done 200 years ago. I would wish that out of that movement we would have retained the kind of skepticism of the state that my father had, and a lot of ordinary black people always had. And in fact, a lot of Southern blacks always had. Our view of the state was always skeptical, as opposed to Northern blacks, who tended to be more trusting. And ironically, although the civil rights came out of the South, it began to take on the Northern view of the state as being a benevolent institution. It isn't. It can't be ultimately. You can hone it, bend it in, and be vigilant over it. And our founding fathers, of course, knew this. Blacks have had the most in our country. Perhaps next to the Indians, the most extreme example of this. You would think, yes? You would think that from a history such as ours, that we would have understood two things. First of all, that the government, while we need it, ultimately cannot be our friend. And also that we don't need it to be our friend, really. It is just an instrument.
So what would black minorities do if they broke the alliance with the government?
If they broke the reliance with the government, they would depend more on themselves. We would acknowledge the legacy of Booker T. Washington, which is slowly coming back to legitimacy now. That Booker T. was very right about a lot of things. And you see, this is nothing extraordinary. This is, you don't need to have a degree in sociology to know these things. And we should have kept that side of our story, which some today would call the conservative side of black history and black culture.
Well, they were very self-reliant for
and we,
a long time.
You see, the thing is, we would not be here were it not for our own efforts. That is most of our history has been in relationship to a government that has not been very kind,
But there's a paradox,
to say the least.
There's a paradox in what you just said, because your own efforts brought a change in the efforts of the civil rights movement, which you didn't join, brought a change in the attitude of government.
Yes, but you see, the curious thing that happened was that there was a shift in perspective. I'm not questioning the historical fact. What I'm saying is that the definition of what was done has undermined further movements toward freedom. You see, what was thought to have been done was not that we did it, that this was an outgrowth of self-reliance. It was not this. It was thought that, it was those NAACP guys and all those intermediaries and who got with those Washington folk. That's what was thought. And they encouraged it. And so we now have the state and all of its service delivery people who are standing between the black community and the state. And we have very little change going on, and everybody's throwing up his hands and saying, what do we do? What do we do? And no one says, why don't you do it for yourself? You've known for 200 years how to do it, so why don't you do it?
So it's all right in your scheme of things for blacks to organize to achieve social equality?
No.
It's not.
That's not what I said.